How's it going, everybody, and welcome back to our Nexus dashboard series. In this video, we're going to go ahead and start working on the configuration for Nexus 3 and 4 so that we can create the VRF, so we can create the VLANs, and we can create the SPIs in order for communication from Nexus 3 and Nexus 4 to actually begin working. Now, I want to take kind of a couple minutes here to try to put into perspective the difference between a traditional layer 2 network and a VXLAN fabric layer 2 connectivity and how they differ. So other than the amount of configuration needed, there's a lot of moving parts. So essentially what ends up happening with a traditional layer 2 network, you create your VLANs, you create an interface VLAN or the switch virtual interface or SVI, and that IP address is going to be configured on any of the devices that are members of that subnet. So if you have a bunch of endpoints that are sitting inside of VLAN 10 and VLAN 11 and their gateway is set to the IP address of the SVI, then traffic will be able to leave the VLAN and come back into the VLAN and everybody will be happy. Communication will work the way you expect it to. You'll be able to get inter-networking working. Now, it's very easy to get that working. You create your VLAN, so VLAN 10, you give it a name, you hit the enter key, you exit out, you go to interface VLAN 10, you give it an IP address, you shut the interface, you exit out, that's it. That's as simple. Setting up a VLAN and setting up layer 3 switching is very, very easy to do. That'd be the extent of it. So if you were studying for your CCNA, I just gave you a whole bunch of answers. So if you are doing this with VXLAN, however, it is much different, much more involved. With VXLAN, you are dealing with the concept of tenancy. 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 What is a tenant? Think of a tenant like it would be if you were looking at an apartment complex. You're an apartment building. You have this building with lots of small units inside of it, and you have the ability of renting out each apartment to a person. Someone's going to have to be the person signing for the lease that you're going to be signing, and that person is going to be your tenant. The tenancy, if you have more than one tenant in a building, so if you have a building with, say, 8 apartments, 4 on the top floor and 4 on the bottom, you will have a multi-tenant building. That's what that means. Multi-tenancy means you have 2 or more VRFs. What is a VRF? A VRF, VRF stands for virtual routing and forwarding. The idea behind that is a user-created routing table. So you have the default VRF, which is your global routing table. If I was to log into N3, Nexus 3, and do a show IP route, you would see communication from Nexus 3, 4, 1, and 2 all communicating with each other. That is the global routing table. If I wanted to enable routing in between Nexus 3 and Nexus 4, what I would essentially end up needing to do is I'd create my VRF, and in this case here I will be starting off with DC1 VRF prod. And what will end up happening is once I create the VRF, which is my tenant, I will then be able to map the SVIs that will be the default gateway to the VRF, which will make the IP address of the SVI part of the DC1 VRF prod routing table. That will give me the ability of segmenting my traffic. VRFs really are nothing more than a way of segmenting traffic. The idea is if I want to have 2 tenants, this could be 2 different business units. For example, you might have accounting and you might have finance. They both need to be in they have their own set of IP addresses, their own subnets, all that type of stuff. And you don't want them to be able to, you don't want their applications or their servers or their whatever it is going on in business unit. That business unit is not allowed to talk to another business unit. Server to server, that is. So what ends up happening is you would put each one of those business units in their own VRF. Their default gateways, their SPIs, would all be members of that VRF. And if I did a show IP route VRF accounting, you would only see the accounting IP addresses, the accounting subnets, and stuff like that. Same thing with finance. You'd only see the finance gateways and the finance subnets inside that VRF. That is really the scale that VXLAN brings to the table. Now, the reason why you do this is, again, segmentation. So if I want to provide scalability, that is how I would go about giving scalability. You can have multiple VRFs deployed. You can selectively choose which leaf switches that those are. You can be selective as which switches get which VRFs. So you may not apply all VRFs to all switches. It could be a mix and match depending on the needs of the environment. Most of the time, customers that I work with, they might have 2 or 3 tops when it comes to VRFs. There's not going to be a lot of them because we're not dealing with, I don't deal with web scale. I don't deal with Amazon, or I don't deal with Facebook. I don't deal with anything that has a massive amount of scale to that level. Not saying that these solutions couldn't scale to that. They absolutely could. Now, what ends up happening in the background here is when we go to dashboard and start getting everything configured, first thing we're going to do is create the VRF, DAC1 VRF-prod. We're going to create that, and then once we create it, underneath the VRF, then we'll create all the networks. The networks are going to be what is going to get pushed down to the leaf switches, Nexus 3 and Nexus 4, that's going to allow the communication to actually happen. Once we have the VRF created, that's basically the layer 3 routing table. Then we're going to add subnets to the layer 3 routing table so they can route in between each other. And then once that's been built, then we'll be able to go down to the interface level of Nexus 3 and Nexus 4 and map which interfaces are going to be in which VLANs. So that layer 2 traffic, so server 31 and server 33, will be able to talk to one another layer 2. And then if they need to talk between server 32 and server 34, they'll be able to talk because we'll have inter-VXLAN communication or inter-VNI routing. Now, this is where it gets a little bit more interesting when it comes to the inter-VLAN routing, the inter-VNI routing, I should say. When you do your inter-VNI routing, there's this concept of symmetric IRB, integrated routing and bridging. Integrated routing and bridging means that you're going to have layer 2 and layer 3 going on at the exact same time. There was a point in time, many years ago, where you couldn't route and switch or bridge at the same time on the same device. Well, some really smart people got together and figured out a way to make that happen. So we have the ability of doing routing and bridging at the exact same time. Think of a bridge as no different than that being a switch. The terminologies are pretty much the same. In ACI, you'd create your tenant, you create a VRF, you create a bridge domain. So in here, we're creating a VRF, then we attach networks to it, which are our subnets. A subnet is a bridge, a switch. It's a layer 2 broadcast domain. It's overly complicated the way they sometimes do things architecturally, but at the end of the day, that's essentially how it works. Now, with that being said, when you have this, there's going to be a dedicated VLAN that's going to be used for the VRF communication. That VLAN itself is going to be what they refer to as a shared VLAN. That shared VLAN is going to be deployed across every one of your switches. I don't care how many of them you have, this VLAN is going to be on every box that you deploy VXLAN to, and it needs to be that way so that you can enable routing functionality. Unlike, it was asymmetric. There's another variation out there, and I can't remember off the top of my head what it is. But symmetric IRB means that you are going to, there's a bridge, route, bridge logic to how this actually works. The idea is, for example, if server 31 and server 32 wanted to talk to each other, what would end up happening is actually a bad example, server 31 and server 40, because they're on 2 different switches. If they wanted to talk to each other, I would have to bridge in, so I'd have to bring traffic in from the endpoint onto the switch. That's layer 2 communication. I would then route it from the VLAN that is coming in on, and then I would route it to the next switch that it's going to connect to. So the first part is going to be the bridge, bringing traffic in from server 31 into Nexus 3. That's the bridge, the first bridge. The first route is routing it from the local VLAN, so for example VLAN 11 to, let's say, VLAN 70. I would route it from VLAN 11 to VLAN 70. That's the first route. The second route is then jumping it over the VXLAN fabric to Nexus 4. That'd be my second route. I have to then move it between boxes. There's VXLAN encapsulation at that point. And then I'd have to take the traffic and I'd have to route it from VLAN 70 into VLAN 11 again, or inside to VLAN 10, because I'm talking an even number device. And then I would end up putting that traffic into VLAN 10, and then I would bridge it outbound to server 40. So it's a bridge, route, bridge. So you have to move it to the shared VLAN 70, for example, that's going to be across the board on all your switches. Now, the interesting thing about this, and sometimes it makes it a little bit difficult to follow, is that VLAN 10 and VLAN 11 will also be on Nexus 3 and Nexus 4. You don't have to have every data VLAN available on every switch. You can mix and match if you so choose to do so. That's actually one of the beautiful parts about VXLAN. You can mix and match your environment. So what we're going to go through and do is I'm going to create the VRF first, and then I'm going to push it to all the devices. Then I'm going to create a couple of networks, push them to all of the switches, and then I'm going to go down to the interface level and I'm going to configure the interfaces to be in the appropriate VLANs on Nexus 3 and Nexus 4, so you guys can see exactly how that comes into play. It's a fairly straightforward process, but until you've actually seen it done, it can be kind of tricky to follow the logic and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and jump into dashboard. I am going to refresh the screen. I'm probably going to have to log in. Alright, so I'm going to click on DC1. And then what I'm going to do, the first thing is I'm going to create a VRF. VRF, actions, create. I'm going to call this one DC1-VRF-prod. The VRF ID, this is going to be my VNI, my VXLAN network identifier. So 3000, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say propose VLAN. Remember when we set this up, we used 70. I'm going to put in here 70 as well. VLAN 70 is going to be what we use. And then we can create a VRF VLAN name. I'm going to go ahead and type in, this will be my layer 3 VNI, so to do any inter VNI routing. And then underneath the advanced tab, I have the ability of advertising a bunch of different stuff. So I can change the interface MTU to be 9216. That's actually what I'm going to keep it as. In order to advertise this route to the routing table, I'm going to tag it. The way that I'm going to redistribute it is through this fabric route map redistribution subnet. So what I'm going to end up doing is this tag will be assigned as a match tag 12345. So in the configuration you'll see route-map fabric rmap redis subnet, and you're going to see match tag 12345. And then you're going to call this route map from the BGP VRF configuration, and you're going to type in redistribute direct route map fabric rmap redis subnet, and you'll see what that looks like when we get into the configuration. When it comes to BGP paths, we're only going to do one. When it comes to iBGP paths, we're going to go 2 because we have 2 different spines, Nexus 1 and Nexus 2. I'm not enabling tenant routed multicast for right now. We might come back to that in the future. I'm not doing any tenant routed TRM border gateway multi-site, not dealing with that. What I do want to do is I want to turn this off. I want to say do not advertise a default route, and then do not add a static default route to anything that I'm doing. So I'm going to go ahead and click on create, and then I'm going to go click on here since now it's there. I'm going to go into this, and actually I'm going to take it one step back. Let me close this one out. I'm going to click here. Under actions, I'm going to go type in, well actually it won't let me do it that way. Click here, dive into it. VRF attachments. I'm going to attach this to Nexus 3 and Nexus 4. Click here, Actions, I'm going to say Quick Attach, and it's going to say, warning, the selected switch VRF attachments will be done using the default or next available VLAN, which should be 70, which is what I expected it to use. And then I'm going to go ahead and click this box right here and say Actions and say Preview. So here's the configuration that it's going to deploy. So we're going to create our profile. This is the VLAN used for our layer 3 VNI. We can see that it's got a, this is the VN segment is 70. We can see that the VNI is 70. And this is all the configuration. So we have an interface. We are a member of DC1 VRF prod. We have IP forward. IP forward is a interesting thing because it doesn't actually give it itself an IP address, because there is it's not like a IP unnumbered. It's a I can't really articulate the reason for the IP forward command off the top of my head. I don't remember specifically what that's for, but this is how I can identify that this is your layer 3 VNI. Underneath the VRF DC1 VRF prod, we can see the redistribution. Here's our mapping, and this redistribution process will come into play further on down the line when I get into creating networks and things like that. I'm going to cancel, and I'm going to go ahead and click close. I'm going to go ahead and check the box, Actions, Deploy, and now it's going to go ahead and deploy that config to my two switches, Nexus 3 and 4. So this will take a couple of seconds for it to actually push, and we'll be in good shape. Alright, so the configuration is done. They're deployed, which is what we want to see. Now I can go to networks here and create them if I wanted to, but I'm going to go over here to networks. I'm going to create a couple networks. Create. This one here is going to be DC1-VRF, DC1 VLAN 10. It's going to be part of DC1 VRF prod. The network ID, again, this is going to be my VXLAN network identifier. I can use 2000. I'm going to propose the VLAN 10. And I'm going to close that out. So there's that piece. I'm going to give this an IP address of 10.1.10.1/24. The VLAN name is going to be VLAN 10. And then underneath the advanced tab, we'll get to this here in just a little bit, is this command down here at the bottom. Notice how the routing tag comes into play. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is what's going to allow this IP address to get advertised into BGP. We have this enable layer 3 gateway on border. And when we get into routing inside and out of, into and out of the VXLAN fabric, we'll need to check this box. I'm going to go ahead and click on create. And I'm going to go ahead and click on actions, create another one. I'm going to call this one here, this will be DC1 VLAN 11. VLAN ID proposed is going to be 11. The network ID is going to be 2001. 10.1.11.1/24. VLAN name is going to be VLAN 11. And then I'm going to click on create. So there we have it. Everything was looking pretty good there. I'm going to go to click on this guy. I'm going to go to actions, multi-attach, and then check the box, click next. Which interfaces do I want to map this to? And right now I don't. I'm just going to go ahead and click next and then save. And then I'm going to be able to click on deploy all. So it's going to go ahead and push that config out. There you go. Click close. And we're looking pretty good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back over here. I'm going to pull up this guy right here. I'm going to look at Nexus 3. Go ahead and log in here real quick. I'm going to do a show interface status. We have a bunch of interfaces. I do a show VLAN brief. There's my VLANs. If I do a show IP interface brief, VRF DC1 VRF prod. There's my two IP addresses, or my two SPIs. Everything's looking pretty good there. Show BGP VRF DC1 prod IPv4 unicast summary. Go ahead and look at this. I have got a couple of subnets that I'm advertising, 10.1.10 and 10.1.11. Now what I get to go do is I get to map these interfaces. So I have to go into dashboard and make some config changes. So the way that I'm going to do that, I'm going to show you guys how to do, I'll do, which interface is this? 1.1 and 1.3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and configure these guys through the normal configuration method, which is coming over here, closing this out, and clicking on DC1, and then going to switches, and then clicking on N3, clicking over here, and then I'm going to go to interfaces. And I'm going to go ahead and manually configure a couple of interfaces. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys how to do this the manual way through the GUI. We're going to configure a couple of interfaces, and then I'm going to show you guys how to do it the quick way, the way that I do this a lot, which is doing it through a CSV file. So it's going to be basically we're going to export a spreadsheet from dashboard. We're going to make some changes to it. We're going to save it. We're going to import it again and reapply the config. So it's going to make deploying interface level configurations very, very easy to do. So what I'm going to do is over here I've got I'm going to do VLAN 11. I've got E11 and E13. So I'm going to grab E11 and E13. I'm going to come, notice how they say interface trunk host. I'm going to say actions. I'm going to say edit. The policy that I need to select is going to be, this is going to be access host. Select it. BPDU guard, I'm going to say no. Then I want to turn BPDU guard on. The MTU is going to be the default. Speed is going to be auto. I could set it to whatever value I want it to be. The VLAN is going to be VLAN 11. And I'm going to go ahead and click on save. And then I'm going to go ahead and deploy that config. And this is what the config is going to look like. Give that a second to pop up. So I'm going to say depending lines of config, it's going to say no spanning tree. It only did it to one interface. That's because I only did it to one. That's one interface. So that's essentially what the line is going to look like. It's going to pull all the trunking config off and then migrate the interface over to an access port. So that's going to do that. I'm going to go ahead and deploy config. That'll take a couple of seconds to do. And once it's deployed, there we go. I'm going to go ahead and close this guy out. And now that I have gotten those two configured, now you'll notice that they're in both interface access host. I come back over here to Nexus 3. I do a show MAC address table dynamic for VLAN 11. We see a couple of we see MAC addresses showing up from the endpoints, which is what we want to see, right? So we have that. The next thing I'm going to go do is I'm going to see that VLAN 10 is E14 and E12. So what I'm going to go do is I'm going to take these interfaces right here, and I'm going to say actions. I'm going to say more and export. And what that's going to do is it's going to create a CSV file. The CSV file is going to be how you can manually deploy a whole bunch of interfaces at one fell swoop without having to go through and do the individual clicks. So I'm going to say this is going to be DC1. All this stuff is going to stay the same. The only thing that's going to change is going to be the interfaces. So in this case here, I'm going to come back over to this guy. It's going to be 1.4 and 1.2. So let's pull this back up. So we're going to say this will be 1.2 and 1.4. The VLAN is going to be 10. VLAN is going to be 10. And that's pretty much all I need to worry about. Now I'm going to make a suggestion. When you're doing this type of a design, what you can't do is you can't have trunk and access at the same time in the same spreadsheet. So if you have a scenario where you have switches that are going to be providing trunking access to something and then also interface as an access, so access ports, you need to have two different spreadsheets, one for trunk, one for access. You can't have the two different policy types assigned at the same time. So you'd have a spreadsheet for all your access ports and have a spreadsheet for all of your trunk ports. Just keep that in mind. So I'm going to go ahead and say 10. I'm going to go say File, Save As, Browse. I'm going to call this one here is going to be N3-updated. And I'm going to save. Yes, it exists. That's all I need to do there. So now I'm going to come back over here to Dashboard. I'm going to say Actions, More, Import, Browse for N3 updated. I'm going to click on Open. Now it's been brought in. I'm going to click on OK. And then it's going to go through. It's going to validate the configuration. And you'll notice that now 1.2 and 1.4 are now modified to access host, and the configuration is pending. I just need to click on one of these guys. I'll grab them both. Say, you can go to Actions and Deploy here. It's going to grab the config. This usually takes a minute. You can do that, or I prefer, without having to do anything, I don't have anything selected. I didn't say Actions. I can actually, I'm at the switch level. So I'm going to back up one level. I'm going to close this out. I'm going to go back to the data center level. You notice that N3 has pending changes. I'm going to go Actions, Recalculate, and Deploy. I prefer doing this if you want to do one fell swoop configuration. So now it says 21 lines of config. I'm going to check this box. The trunking config has been taken away and the access config has been put into play. I'm going to click on that and just click on Deploy All. This is my preferred way of doing it. Because this way here, if I need to do multiple config changes at one time, like for example, if I'm configuring a pair of switches at one time, or if I'm configuring multiple switches, I can do recalculate and deploy, and it's going to push the config to wherever it needs to go. I'm not looking at one switch level config. Alright, click close. And I'm going to go back over here to this guy. I'm going to hit the up arrow. And I should see a bunch of additional configuration coming through. Okay, now I'm going to go back over here to the topology with this guy and with this guy. And I'm going to do some ping tests. So on, say, server 31, I should be able to ping 10.1.11.35. I can, which is pinging from server 31, hits Nexus 3. Goes across the trunk link to switch 13 to switch 35. So we come over here and I do a show MAC address table dynamic. I should see traffic coming through. I see 31 coming in over gig 1/2. Even though if I do a show ether channel summary, I do have a port channel, it gets the job done, right? So everything's working out the way I expect it to. Now, that doesn't allow me to talk to Nexus 4 yet, and that's going to be the next step of our setup, is I'm going to go ahead and do the exact same thing for Nexus 4. I'm going to come over here, I'm going to go to Nexus 4, and I'm going to say interfaces, and I'm going to make 1, 2, 3, and 4. So 1 and 3 are odd, 2 and 4 are even. So that'll be easy to remember. So I'm going to go grab 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to say Actions, More, Export. I'm going to grab this guy. Close this one out. And here we have that. So what I'm going to do is this trunk, I'm going to make this a, this will be access And I can just double check that too if I want to. I can just check this box, check them all. I can come in to here, actions, edit. And if I want to just validate, it's going to be interface access host. So I just wanted to double check on my config there. So, and I'm going to basically take this config and push it down to there. The allowed VLANs. Actually, let me go ahead and pull this up real quick. Allowed VLAN 10. Okay. Just double checking, making sure my work is accurate. Allowed VLANs is going to be access. So it's instead of being allowed VLANs, it's going to be access VLANs. So I'm just going to steal that line from this guy. And it's going to be, so this will be 1, 1, this will be 11, this will be 10, this will be 11, this will be 10. And then everything else is looking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and say file, save as, browse, and this will just be N4 updated. Save, close it, don't save. I'm going to go back to, I'm going to come in here and say actions, and then import, and then N4 updated, open. Hopefully I did everything right. Click on OK. And there they go. They're all good to go. I'm going to say action. You can come in here and you can click on deploy if you'd like. This is going to be switch level. 41 lines of config. It's doing all of that. Click on close and deploy all. So there's a couple different ways that you can do it. I'm just showing you what tends to be, like I like going back out to the fabric level and doing a recalculate and deploy. But both of them get the job done. Alright, I'm going to click on close. Alright, so now that that's all done, go back over here to the topology. I'm going to go back over here to this guy. I'm going to go to this guy here and I'm going to do a show MAC address table dynamic. And what we're going to see is we're learning additional MAC addresses. We're seeing 40, 42, 39, and we're seeing 41. And you notice it's NVE1 to 10111, which is exactly what we're looking to do. So that means if I come back over here to this guy, and I'm on switch 31, server 31, I should be able to ping 39, and it should respond. There it goes. And if I ping from 40, if I do 10 dot, that should also respond. There it goes. So I have inter-VNI routing working as well. It's a little bit longer, so you have to do some ARPs and things like that, but it's working the way I would expect it to. N4 is the same way. Let me log into him. We're going to do a show MAC address table dynamic. All that stuff is looking pretty good. We have a lot more stuff coming across because we have a lot more attached to N3. But if I was to bring this down and do a show BGP VRF DC1 prod IPv4 unicast, you're going to see not a lot, right? This is just the routes that are being propagated. We see a couple of host IP routes. But what I want to do is I want to do a show BGP, L2VPN, EVPN, and what I'm going to see, so if I come up here to the top, the first half, this is going to be L2VNI 2000 for the 10.1.10, and this is going to be 10.1.11 right here. So you see that. And then we have a bunch of other stuff. So we have layer 2 BNI. This is like this is basically the MAC address table. This is your ARP table, right? You have a couple of tables here to take a look at. So it's going to be ARP. So you're going to have ARP, meaning you have MAC addresses and IP addresses blocked at the same time. MAC address table is just this one. You just have MACs here. Same thing with this one here, just MACs for that. Come down a little bit further. We have our layer 3 BNI. We have two different subnets. We have 10.1.11 and 10.1.10. And it's working the way we expect it to. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you get basic operations working with inside of the VXLAN fabric. As you can see, it was pretty easy. The cool thing about it is, it was, as long as you know what to click and where to click it and where to send it, configuration is actually very, very easy to do. Instead of you having to go through, let me go ahead and just do a quick show run and come to the top here. You'll see there's a lot of interfaces, so just give me a second here to flow through it. You'll see that we have all of our features turned on that we need to have. We have basically our VRF configuration. We have our SPI configuration for our layer 3 VNI. We have our BGP configuration, and that's all underneath the VRF prod profile. Then we have profile specific to VLAN 10. We have a profile specific to VLAN 11. And then we have, those are applied where we need them to. So down at the bottom, I'm sure you saw it. I've scrolled away from it kind of quick. But you can see apply profile, DC1 VRF prod, DC1 VLAN 10, etc. And then we have our underlay configuration. So that's essentially what we got going on there. So what I'm going to do in between this video and the next is I am going to bring on Nexus 5 and Nexus 6. I'm going to get them bootstrapped. Then I'm going to show you guys how to add new switches to the fabric. This is going to be a VPC pair, so you're going to see how that comes into play as well. We're going to go ahead and do a VPC down to switch 14 and get that configured and everything squared away with it. Then once all that is stood up, we're going to get Nexus 7 and 8 online as border leaf switches. Get that all configured, and then we'll connect outbound to Cat AK15 and 16. So this will be its own. I'm going to bring the switches. I'm going to get everything booted up first. This will take just a little bit of time. So this will be its own video. Bringing the border leaves on will be its own video, and connecting to the outside world and getting the fabric stood up. So all these devices will be powered on between now and the next video, and I will bring. This will be one video, this will be one video, and then I will take some time to walk you guys through some of the more not so obvious configurations that you need to know about in order to bring the campus LAN online, and so the campus can actually access the data center and all that stuff that goes along with it. We don't have any internet routing right now, but I might add that down the road, but for right now it's not super specifically important here. And then I'll bring on DC2. We'll bring DC2 online and then use MPLS VPN. We'll configure a basic one to connect the two sites together. My goal is I'd like to get some semblance of a potential multi-site deployment working. I've never been, I don't have any customers that have a multi-site deployment through Dashboard deployed. So it's never been a push to get that operational. So there is some other opportunities to test it out. So I'm going to see what my options are for that. But that being said, that is where I'm at operationally with that. So if you guys have any questions, please leave a comment down in the comment section down below. And until next time, guys, take it easy.